Welcome back to Beyond the Dimensions podcast. I'm here with
Leng.
We have two special guests today. You guys like to introduce yourselves?
Yes, hi, I'm Sergeant Cristie Jacobsen. I'm with the Fargo Police Department.
And I'm Melissa Markergard. I work at Fargo Cast Public Health as the mental health coordinator.
You guys want to tell us about what we're going to be talking about today?
Well, we're willing to talk about whatever you want, but I think we were invited here specifically to talk a little bit about health and safety in general. I currently oversee the School Resource Officer program, and I liaison with the school district. And I have been with the police department now almost 17 years, and have been a supervisor for 4.
Tell us about what you do.
Yeah, so I started at Fargo Cast Public Health about almost my 9th year at Fargo Cast, and I started as a tobacco prevention coordinator. So I did a lot of vaping education, different things like that. And I work in the health promotion division. And so what we try and do at public health in the health promotion division is really prevent illness. So if we're doing our jobs correctly, you probably won't even notice it because we're actually preventing something. So, but now I have moved from tobacco use and vaping into the mental health coordinator role.
Yeah, going off of that,
Yeah.
what do you guys see in youth in Fargo and like FM area? Where do you guys see teens struggling with?
You want to go first?
Sure. And so we kind of see really a dichotomy of 2 different issues. We see both mental health, suicide, ideation, depression, but then we also see the opposite on the pendulum. We've seen a drastic increase in just aggressive behaviors, both physically as well as verbally. And so we're just really trying to get to the bottom of how do we provide appropriate resources to young people so that they feel heard, but also have resources to help them process the complex things that are in their lives.
Yeah. And I think, the main thing is just what Cristie said. And like what I focus on is that mental health piece. So we're seeing lots of depression, lots of anxiety, lots of suicidal ideation, lots of self-harm. But I think it's important to know that you don't get there overnight. So what is leading us to that? And I think Cristie and I discuss it all the time. And a lot of it has to do with for lack of a better way to say it, I think we're as a whole, as a society, we are becoming addicted to very common things. So when you talk about addiction, a lot of times you think drugs. And I'm not talking about addiction to drugs. I'm talking about addiction to caffeine, addiction to our phones, and addiction to social media, and addiction to nicotine and vaping products. And when you become addicted to all of those things, it comes on kind of slowly, but it really ends up affecting you in your daily life because, if you're addicted to caffeine, you can't sleep. And if you can't sleep, then what's happening? Then you don't do well in school because you're exhausted in school, or maybe you can't even get to school. And then when you can't get to school, then your anxiety increases because you're not doing well in school. And then you get depressed. I mean, I'm not making it, I don't mean to make it seem like this is some easy thing that can be avoided. I think it's just a huge snowball effect of things that are affecting our teenagers.
Yeah, I think like a big part of it is like social media within teens, because like everybody wants to fit into a certain trend. Like you said, like you worked into like the vaping part. Like that was like a big trend on social media, and they made like I seen like they're making flavors and stuff for like it's like targeting kids, and
when it's high nicotine content, and so with the high nicotine content, that's something that didn't exist. It doesn't exist in cigarettes. So it's a whole new thing that our teenagers are having to deal with. When I was in high school, we didn't have any of that. Like I want to date myself. You didn't even maybe have a cell phone in high school. You know, I got my own cell phone when I was a freshman in college. So we're all living very different lives, you know, and it's, you know, and I think you're right. You do try and fit in because of social media. And that's a huge issue because
what you are exposed to as young people today is so very different than any of our generations. And we are really struggling as the service providers who care about you, and how do we get the education and resources to you in a way that you would listen and relate to, because that's what we want to do. We don't want to minimize the struggles, because your social circles are so much larger than what we ever had. Like, my social circle was physically who I attended high school and college with. Do you know what I'm saying? It was your community definition was so much smaller, where yours is so much larger. What you have access to through your phone and through social media expands your world. And in so many great ways, yes. And so that's awesome. Just like this, what you're doing here is an awesome example of that. But the impact and the stress that also comes with that is what we are struggling to keep up with, because the stress that you are under to be perceived as perfect and always accessible and right in all with things puts an immense amount of pressure on you. And so then as a result, kids are self-medicating with, they start out with caffeine and then maybe move to nicotine, and then they're dabbling in marijuana and those kinds of complexities. Or they're struggling with stress and anxiety and depression and isolation. And we also can't minimize the impact that COVID and isolation had on young people your age, right? It was a huge part of your life for several years, and all of those unsureties and complexities. And so you don't know who to talk to. And getting access to resources is complex. Sometimes it's limited, and we want to figure out how do we get access and resources to you in a way that you would be willing to reach out to.
For our next question, what does a mental / spiritual, emotionally unwell youth look like?
That's a complex question. An emotionally unwell youth, how do they look?
They look like you, and they look like you. Me. Yeah. They look like your friends. And there's no definition, which is why it's so hard to recognize someone who's going through a struggle. Someone might be struggling, and it might be obvious to their close friends or family, but it might not be, because we all put on those masks of what people want to see. Mental health is a complex and difficult conversation to have or to own up to in so many ways. And so we work very hard at trying to normalize the conversation of mental health so that you think of it as appropriate to seek mental health services the way that you would a physical checkup or a sports checkup and those kinds of things. And it's hard to break those barriers and know where people are at emotionally, because they all look like you and your friends and us.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, I see that with a lot of youth in my school, where like you can't tell what they're going through, you can't tell what they're doing. Like people I don't even think that would do like things of that nature, like smoke, vape, or be so easily influenced, are the people like as soon as I see them outside of school, they're easily influenced to do something out of their character, or like pressure to do something that they wouldn't do just to fit in or fit into that criteria they feel like they have to be in to be like, cool, or you know, be in that same peer group.
So this is why we're here. Like, I know I'm not cool. You know, I'm old enough to be your mom, right? But at the same time, I desperately want to offer you safety, stability, and resources. But I don't know how to go about it in a way that you would be willing to open up or have conversation. And so you, as leaders in your schools and in this community, and quite frankly, the leaders of our future, we are asking you to guide and assist us as program leaders on how do we get this message to you and your social circles and your friends and your schools in a way that they will listen, because we are close to just really being more and more fearful about kids and what they're exposed to and what they are dabbling in and what they are experiencing.
It's kind of like the next question, like how do we become more knowledgeable about like mental illness? And it's like a lot of people our age, it's starting to increase, but a lot of people never like did the research on like how it's affecting people. And like a way to like break through is if we all like understand the importance of mental health and talk to each other and help each other.
And just to like go off what you guys saying, like leaders of the future, I feel like that's the whole that was the whole purpose of naming what we do beyond the game. You know, it's beyond basketball, it's beyond just this sport. It ties back into mental health or those adults that you could look at and go talk to, things like that. Like talk about things like that, or if you're going through.
So then the question that they're asking is, what are some ideas, or what are some things, we know that mental health is a struggle. We'll find this part out. But for your generation, for the students that are at your school and your friend group, how do you get that message out there to where it's not just understood, but where people want to understand that it's important?
And I was going to touch on that. So
It's like a comfortable adult to talk to.
Yeah, right. I feel like that ties back into what we're doing now, the podcast, you know, making this an open discussion to reach, you know, kids that don't feel comfortable. Like giving, like, now we have the platform to talk about things like gender perspective, religion perspective.
Even this.
Yeah, even this right now. Like, we're giving the platform, things like emoja, you know, being comfortable within your skin, being around your peer group, being able to open up, you know. I feel like the more and more this stuff goes on, the more and more we're going to continue to expand and reach out to kids that might not be, you know, the most well-spoken and easy influence, and they can have another outlet to come talk to somebody about it, you know, and relate to those same experiences and relate to the things that they're going through. Because nobody wants to talk to somebody that doesn't know anything that they're going through.
Yeah.
You want to talk to somebody that is kind of in your shoes, you know?
That's kind of like what we see in Beyond the Game. Like, we all grew up with each other. We all went through like similar experiences. And then Janelle, he like brought it all together. We all like basketball. We all had these different conversations. And like now he's like a comfortable adult that I can talk to. And like it helps. It's like what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah.
It's like,
and I think if I think you guys bringing this all to light and talking about mental health in a normal, everyday, like we all have mental health. But I mean, that is the true, honest statement, is we all have mental health, and where we are on that continuum of mental health is where we are that very moment, and it can change. But to be able to talk about it and to know that it can change and to be okay with that, but then to know what to do when it's not so good, when your mental health is not so good. We can all have really great days, but something can happen to us when we leave. We could get a text message or a Snapchat, text. But we could all find something out that is going to send us down the continuum and have our mental health struggle, you know. And what do you do when that happens? And I think it's important for kids, youth, you guys, your friends, your peers, to know that if something does happen, there are people that are here to help. There's a phone number that's there to help, you know. I think we're losing way too many youth at a really fast pace in our country as a whole. And how do we stop that from happening? I think that's important to talk about.
Yeah. We're gonna, with Beyond Dimensions podcast, we're gonna continue to shed light on these type of topics. I feel like being a youth, it's everybody's responsibility, if you have the platform, to talk about things like that, shed light on things like that, because it's our future. We're the upcoming generation, and how can we be looked at as leaders if we're not doing anything to help? Yeah. What's the point of us having this podcast if we're just gonna it's fun, like we have fun, this is great conversations, we're learning and everything like that, but how could we have a podcast and have this big of a platform and not shed light on topics like that? So I always encourage all youth to wear their heart on their sleeve. Don't be scared to talk about things like mental health or how you're feeling, because you matter. Those things in your life do matter. And I feel like people are so scared to be looked at as weird, or those societal pressures of not fitting in, that they don't want to have conversations like that. And it's really messed up. It's sad. Like, I can see people every day in school, like, they rather go straight to vaping than ever have a conversation about how they're actually feeling. Yeah. Like, they're so dependent on a certain object, something else, besides actually trying to get to the root of the problem. And like you guys said, like, Beyond the Game is just a small portion of what we can do to help. Hopefully we, expand it, but there's more ideas that.
And it's the leaderships like you and what you're trying to do here and through basketball. It's just really normalizing it so that your friends hopefully will be comfortable coming to you and be like, I'm struggling. And then you try to figure out, okay, how can I, as your buddy and your friend, come alongside you and help you with that? But then at the same time, we also want to balance the fact that we do not want to add any additional pressure and stress to you as a young person to feel like you have to take the burden to fix or help or provide safety to your friend who is struggling. Yeah. And so through there, that's why we want to emphasize resources for you to pass along to your friends so that you don't feel the burden of, like, how do I
help this person?
This person, like, you're the only person who can. One, it was awesome that they felt comfortable coming to you, but know that you have resources. So you have your coaches, the staff at YouthWorks obviously has developed, a very powerful, trusting relationship with you. But we just want to, there's school social workers, there's school counselors. Hopefully you recognize there's a teacher that someone has trust in. We as the police want to assist. I know that that's a little bit more of a barrier that we can talk about in some of the future questions. But one thing we want to emphasize the most is that 988, that's a phone number that you call, and they're going to process whatever it is the person is going through and give resources. And you can do that together. And there's a level of, being anonymous and not having to be embarrassed by sitting across from someone you may not want to share with, but also recognizing that this is big. What the family or person is experiencing is a lot. And so just really getting across that I'm here for you. You say that to your friends, I'm here for you. And hopefully they'll share with you. But then if what they're sharing is really big, know that there are community resources out there, and that that pressure and stress doesn't lay on your shoulders alone.
I had a question, like a lot of people in youth, they fail to realize that mental health is important. Like, what do we do about people that don't even think it's important?
Well, yeah. Mental health, we all have it. And I think, so if someone feels like it's not important, that's Incorrect.
Yeah.
Because I really feel like our mental health drives everything. If our mental health is not good, if we are not feeling mentally well, we're not going to have good days. I mean, it doesn't matter if everything else is going great. If you have all the money in the world, if you have food on the table, if you have everything that you need, and your mental health is struggling, you are struggling. So when it comes to people who make you feel like mental health isn't important, I don't even know.
I think to a certain extent too, that maybe we just have to dig down and figure out, maybe we're just using the wrong terms in a way, so that it's something that they just aren't understanding. But our emotions are real, and how we feel is valid, and it's real. And so people don't necessarily, they think mental health automatically means mental illness, and that's not the same either. Because you can be physically ill, and that be different than you wanting to maintain physical health as an athlete, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we are trying to break, that stigma of understanding that when we talk about mental health, we are not implying that you are not well or that you have an illness. Now, sometimes you do, sometimes depression and anxiety, because those things are real, okay? But stress and pressure all have to do with how you feel and how you process what's occurring to you every day. And so we just want to equip you with the ability to maintain that emotional health so that you're responding appropriately. Because oftentimes they manifest in physical ways. You're really tired, your stomach hurts, you get headaches, your eyes hurt. You know what I'm saying? And so maybe we're just not explaining it well, because it's all part of your body. And we don't want people to think that we're implying that you're crazy or ill or unwell. You know, it's your brain and your emotions process what's occurring to you in different ways, and everyone responds differently, and no one way is right or wrong. We just want to figure out, how do we have the conversation in a way that is impactful and meaningful, so that it's understood.
Yeah, like I see like a lot of people try to put like they try to put everything on themselves. Like they don't think they need help. And like learning more about it is gonna understand, like, you don't always need to work on things by yourself.
Right.
And that's hard, because as you get older, right now at your age, you're on the cusp of adulthood, right? Where you will then legally have the right and ability to make choices for yourself without having to go through parents and guardians and those types of things. And so as you're preparing for that, you feel the need to present yourself as capable and mature and all of those types of things. And nobody wants to put any type of a spotlight on any level of weakness, whether it's physical or emotional or anything. And so I think that's why it's often more difficult to have those frank conversations, like telling your friend or your loved ones, I'm struggling. I'm under an immense amount of pressure and stress, and I don't know how to work through this. And what works for you and comes to resources, and what works to you and what works for me can all vary and change, because what you're exposed to, what you've experienced, the supports in your life are all going to vary.
Do you guys think race or culture presents different mental battles for like different people?
Yes. And I think some of that can be,
And I think gender too.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. All of that. And I think that some of that can be attributed to like trauma, cultural trauma, things of that nature. And I think, when you look at trauma, everybody experiences their own trauma. Trauma looks different to everybody. So yes, I think we have to acknowledge that there are certain cultures that have been through a lot historically and presently. And if we acknowledge that, and can also, that will help us to move in a direction that can assist those struggling with that.
And I like how you said also gender, because we
Yeah.
we talked about this on like another episode, like how like young men, they think like they should like throw their emotions to the side, like not cry or
Well, that's what
do-
you're told,
yeah, yeah,
right?
and then like yeah, and like yeah, put our emotions to the side, and then I think it like causes more harm to than
Absolutely.
good.
The
It for
definition
sure
of
does.
masculinity, is just always a complex thing. And so anything that relates to emotions and the way that mental health does, because it often presents through emotions, makes it even that much more complex for men to express. And so that's really, we just want to break down those definitions and understandings of what masculinity means and what it is.
So at Fargo Cast Public Health, I came up with the tagline, "No feeling is final." So feelings, right? And I didn't create that just for females or people who cry. No feeling. Everybody has feelings. And so when I came up with it, I really wanted people who are really in that place of like, this feeling that I'm feeling today is never going to get better. I don't ever want anyone to think that whatever they're going through today, it's a crisis, that is where they're going to be at forever, because no feeling is final. Every feeling will change at some point. Maybe it'll get a little worse before it gets better. But when I came up with this, then we also added the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline number 988 to this poster. So I don't know, do you want to hold it up? Hold that thing up. No
'Cause what
feeling
we
is
want
final.
people to recognize is hold on in that moment of terror or trauma or crisis that you were experiencing. Hold on, friends, family, resources, loved ones, care for you, and they want to wrap around you and just help, just hold on and get through that moment, so that tomorrow, 5 minutes from now, 10 minutes from now, things will get better.
Because the bottom line is, we need you here.
You have such value as an individual. And we say that to the public, everybody, not just you, but yes, you too, but everybody who's listening. Your potential and value is so important. And when you're in that moment of crisis and trauma, hold on. Help is coming. The emotion will change. That's all we ask of you, is to not make a rash decision in that moment that you cannot come back from.
We're gonna drift into like another topic. For the question, it's why do you think there's a distrust from young black males in law enforcement?
I think that's also very complex. So I think we have to recognize that our entire development of the system in general in the U.S. was founded on racism. Not just our legal and law enforcement system, but our housing system, our banking system, our educational system, our employment system. But often law enforcement is held, and rightfully so, to a higher standard. And so we are trying to improve the reputation and relationship that we have with a community that was established on well-founded fear and persecution. And overcoming that is a journey that hopefully is on the right path. I mean, are we where we want to be in law enforcement when it comes to building trust and establishing trust? No, absolutely not where we want to be. We're also not where we were, for sure, 20, 30 years ago, right? Yeah. And every day and every month and every year, we that have chosen the career of law enforcement have to intentionally recognize that trust building and treating everyone with dignity and respect is a daily, minute by minute occurrence that we have to be committed to.
Yeah.
And I feel like another part of it is just what is seen, you know. Like as a black male myself, I look on the TV, I look on the news, and I see injustice with law enforcement all the time. Like it's almost a regular occurrence at this in the point in my life where right now. I can go on the internet and just look up police officer black male, and I could see racism just that clear as day. But what we won't see is the officers that do care, the officers that do, you know, make the effort to change those things, the programs in different states that we're not a part of to see that aren't part of that, aren't part of the racism, that are part of the change. Like that's what you won't see on social media. So it's kind of just, you know, our perspective. Not saying that racism from law enforcement isn't a big issue that isn't like plagues our country, but for us to look at it as every single police officer is against us, every single police force is against us is wrong, because you don't know. I know many officers that have helped me in my life and done great things for me. I won't even question if I could trust them or not, because I know that they're trustworthy leaders in my community I can comfortably go to, and that's what we don't see.
And I appreciate that, because that is a very open-minded and mature perspective that not everyone has. And we understand that that is something that we have to overcome. And that's one of those complexities about general media, news, and social media, is the negative stories sell and they get more attention. And so it's very difficult for us in law enforcement to show the positive things that we're trying so desperately to do to overcome that stigma and those stereotypes. But then at the same time, recognizing that we still have a long way to go in building that trust by having transparency, being willing to have these difficult conversations, owning up to our past and our mistakes, but more importantly, listening to you as young men to guide us on how do we do better, because I'm not going to have those answers. And so, you know, it's a journey, like I can't continue to say enough, but I can tell you that I didn't go into this career for the money or for the power. I went into this career choice because I care about my community and the people that live in it, and I just want to help and provide safety and security to everyone in it, to include you and all of the men and women who feel distrust and fear towards law enforcement, and figuring out ways that we can build those relationships and establish that trust so that those things that happened in other places or in other times don't happen here or again.
And to piggyback off that, do you think people fully understand law enforcement role in society?
I don't think so. And I think that's part of our own fault as law enforcement is we have historically kept our information close, not disclosed a lot. And so I think you are seeing a transition in the mindset of law enforcement about being more intentional about educating the community about things that we are doing and the resources that we are trying to offer and the changes that we are making in policy and procedure and service. So I think we are trying to do that. A lot of law enforcement agencies are developing their own social media pages to be more transparent and get that word out. But I think we did that to ourselves. And so we're trying to overcome some of those barriers that we put into place and break down those walls.
And there's another question on here that was saying, why does it feel like a lot of our interactions with the law enforcement are negative? But I feel like we already answered that with the use of social media playing a super big influence and only putting out the bad. You know, you're only seeing the bad. You're never seeing the officers that do want to do good, that do want to change the community. So,
but I think we also can't minimize the fact that what is the role of a law enforcement officer, right?
Enforcing law.
It's enforcing the law. And so if I'm enforcing it, it typically means someone has violated it, right? And so nobody wants to be held accountable to their mistakes. We recognize now in law enforcement that to balance that enforcement piece, we have to have a stronger relational piece, which is why you've seen a large shift in law enforcement agencies recognizing that they have to be very intentional about not only transparency, but relationship building and trust building, because you would be more open-minded to someone correcting you and holding you accountable to your mistakes if there was a relationship there already, right? Yeah. And so that is complex for any law enforcement officer and department to do, because how do we relationship build and trust build with a community of 150 or 200,000? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It still needs to be done, and we're committed to doing it, but that's that barrier and complexity that we have to do, because when you make a mistake and we are contacted and we have to hold you accountable, nobody likes to be corrected and punished, right?
Yeah.
And so that is also a complex thing, just solely based on my profession. That's what my job is to do, you know? And if you're interacting with the police, you are typically someone who has made the mistake, or you're the victim of someone else's mistake or wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And so it's not a great day for you all around. And so typically if you're interacting with the police, the situation in and of itself is unpleasant.
Yeah, and I don't think people like can wrap that around their heads that it's not, yeah, they're supposed to be protectors, but if they're holding you accountable, all they're doing is, you know, that's the mistake you did. Like, do you want them to just let you be free and continue doing the bad things that you're doing? You're hurting your community, and they're there to enforce the law. So I feel like people don't really understand that, and will go so, like, would jump to, oh, the police are against us, like, right away, and that's super immature, super ignorant stance.
I really appreciate how mature, like how mature your thought process is on all of this, because this is challenging to think about and to, you know, kind of rationalize in your brain, and you are doing just that. I do want to say, you know, when Cristie mentioned relationship building, you guys have a set of outstanding Fargo Public Schools, West Fargo Public Schools, have two sets of outstanding school resource officers. You know, and you can start, to anybody listening, you can start by creating a relationship with your school resource officer. And that doesn't mean that he or she isn't going to hold you accountable if you make a mistake at school, or you caught they pull you over and you're breaking the law. It doesn't matter that that you have that relationship at school with them, but they're still going to hold you accountable. But having that relationship is important, because I think it would help further what your mature
goal is.
And that's why we're in the schools. It's so much relational. You know, there's a lot of misunderstanding on what is the role of school resource officer in the building, and are we just putting armed cops in buildings? Yes. Are we there for safety? Yes, physical and emotional for sure, but it's also to be part of the young people's success team. We bring resources and education and supports. We just want the schools to be a place where young people can come and thrive and learn and grow to being the future leaders that we want them to be. And we want to be a part of that as well. And that takes, you know, our commitment to you. And so that's another reason why we're in those buildings.
Yeah, I see the difference between SRO officers and then like different, like just patrolling officers. Like in school, it almost works like as a counselor. Like
Yeah.
Like our SRO officer, he comes in like into our class and he talks about like mental health and like different things that it's not like you're being punished. It's just like learning more about.
And that's why we try to be at these things more often, so that you see us in a non-threatening atmosphere. Yes.
Going off of that, when we see things like Tyree Nichols and like racism within cops, what should we think about it?
I think the first thing I want you to recognize is that your anger and outrage is valid. It's real. But what I also want you to recognize is that I am equally angry and outraged as well. And that I wear this badge, and the disservice that they did to the reputation and my life commitment to safety and security was essentially spit on by these officers who made such horrible choices and should be held accountable. And I am equally, I don't want to, it's not about equal when it comes to your outrage versus my outrage, but like we are all upset. And what I don't want you to think is that cops who watch that are going to make excuses, or that we're going to minimize that. That should not be happening.
Yeah, and I really like feel for cops that, you know, wear their badge with honor and such pride in helping their community, and for that to get spit on and basically getting put in the same breath of cops that did
That
such
action.
a thing. Yeah, it's so like I can't imagine how you feel. Like people look at you like you're part of it. You had nothing to do with it. You're equally as, not equally, but you're
Yes.
as,
Yep.
as enraged as we are.
But I
It's
feel like
crazy.
it's like a really hard struggle for like black men after we see like all these incidents happening. Like how are we supposed, like the same thing can happen to me. Like I'm always gonna be like on edge when it's coming to a cop because I see all these negative things on the news. Like I really tie it into myself.
Yeah.
It's hard not to, and that's human nature, which is why that, you know, we want to validate that your feelings of anger and outrage are real, and we as law enforcement are going to do everything we can to reverse those opinions and perspectives, by trying to develop these trusting relationships and getting your input on how can we do better here. I mean, you've already expressed so many mature responses that I want to hear, but I also know that others are still angry and upset. And I want to do more to have these very complicated and difficult conversations more frequently because they're needed. And then all I ask is, like you said, is give me the opportunity to prove to you that my intentions
Or peer. Yeah. And I feel like the more and more we do things like that, the more and more we do things like this, sit down and give police officers a chance to, you know, share their perspectives and be transparent on what their intentions really are, the more and more we could, you know, help the community and, you know, build that trusting and relational bond that we need to be successful.
And the reverse is also true, that we as law enforcement officers need to make sure that we are not also in reverse stereotyping young people that make mistakes, or, you know, we see law enforcement officers holding people accountable who legitimately make bad mistakes and bad choices. And then we as law enforcement can't generalize that entire community or race or neighborhood in those negative ways as well. And so I can't ask you to be open-minded to me if I'm not willing to be open-minded in reverse. And so I think we have to both make change.
And I feel like that ties back into one of our final questions on what's the challenge on being an officer? Like, what are the challenges of being a police officer, especially in this day and age that it's hard. That's why I feel like I can be so, like, have so much rational responses, because I feel like when I look at from their perspective, like, it's hard to not generalize when you come into a situation and you don't really know what's going on, and all you're seeing is turmoil, and you probably have past experiences that you've witnessed bad things happen. So how it's human nature. Your first instinct is, oh, I've seen this situation play out a million times. What is my first instinct to stop it?
And personally, I think like something that's difficult is like you don't go through everyone's experience.
Yeah.
Like you don't have that like understanding of everyone.
Yeah.
I think it would be hard to like tie yourself into like somebody else's situation, because that person's gonna be like, you don't even know what I'm going through.
Yeah.
Like, who are you to tell me this?
Yeah, and that's like a big thing that I would like to pride myself on, is being empathetic to others. So feeling like being in somebody else's shoes, and I don't know what you guys go through that will make you think away. So if a police officer ever wants to hold me accountable for a situation, why would I don't know what they're going through. I don't know what their mindset is, or thought process is. I'm about to come at you negative. That would do nothing for us, you know. I'll come with a mature response, you know, why this is happening. Even if I feel like I was not in the wrong, why would I come and give a negative response? Obviously, you're seeking a negative response back. Like, I've seen, for example, I can't remember, but I was watching this thing, right, with a black guy being super defensive, you know, not trying to cooperate at all with the police officer, and the police officers being trying to be respectful to the guy. And he ended up getting arrested and getting detained, and he was saying, oh, the cops are racist for this. And I'm like, you're not even looking at yourself on the part you played in this. Even if you felt like you were not in the wrong, is your approach. You know, we're all humans at the end of the day.
But sometimes you have to look deeper into that, because I've seen like videos just like that. There's this guy, and he's obviously going to be hostile if like he keeps on getting stopped by the cops.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I understand like both perspectives.
Yeah,
like,
it's hard to find the medium in it.
Yeah, middle ground.
Yeah.
Which is why we have to have these hard conversations. And that's why law enforcement has had to make the shift of, you do what I say because I say it. And there's a lot of education and relationships and trust building have got to be established, because your experiences and your opinions and your perspective are very valid. And I need to know what they are. Just like I would ask that you be open-minded to my opinion and my perspective, and but also just to educate you on why I do what I do, because there's policy and procedure, and then there's law and case law and all of these types of things that I have to know and keep into account, that I have a job to do when I'm called there, and what I'm legally required and obligated to do, and then what I can do and additional resources, all of which I have to do in a very short period of time historically, because I've got 30 other calls waiting where they want me to respond to is, you know, everyone's situation is deeply important to them. And so how do I handle and provide positive perspective or impact on a situation? Because I can't solve a problem in 15 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour, but often that's the perspective and expectation that law enforcement, how do I fix this? When in reality, all we're really doing is stabilizing a crisis in a very short amount of time, and it's complex. And so, like I said, like you said, most times people can see both perspectives, and that's why we just need to continue to have these conversations, so that everyone feels heard.
Yeah, and I can't imagine like how you can how mentally draining and stressful that is. That ties back to one of our last questions. What are the typical mental health concerns for law enforcement? So how do you guys deal with things like that? Like having the, you know, all that pressure on your shoulders to solve a situation in 15 minutes, and then right after that having to respond to something else, and then going there and like.
Yep. I think that's part of that change in mindset of mental health as well. And this is where we talk about gender as well. But, our military and law enforcement are exposed to an immense amount of trauma. And historically, the conversations around mental health have been shut down because they're also typically male dominant fields, right? And men don't talk about emotions and those types of things. And because we saw a drastic increase in suicide and depression in law enforcement as well, it was a huge wake up to the nation that we needed to provide adequate and appropriate mental health services and counseling and resources to law enforcement and recognize the trauma that they experience. Now, how they process it, I think, will also vary based on how many years have you been in the career, right? And so our officers that have been doing it for 5, 10, 15 years, the fear that we have often is that trauma becomes normalized, and we start to shut off that empathy because it's a safe reaction mechanism for us. Because if you've experienced trauma and you have to call the police, that's your first trauma, hopefully, or of the day or the week or the month. But typically law enforcement, we go from one traumatic situation to the next, and we go to all of these and we have to process them. And so I can't talk about all law enforcement agencies, but I am very proud of the Fargo Police Department in that they put a huge emphasis on wellness and wellness checks. And they are bringing in peer support, but psychologists. We're doing physical and emotional check-ins. We're doing a lot to normalize the fact that we need to process and take care of our own mental health, not only for ourselves, but our families, but also for our coworkers and our community. Because if I become a shut off, cold, unemotional, non-empathetic person, it makes doing my job in an appropriate, respectful manner more and more difficult.
Yeah. And that's what you need to be, successful in a field like that. Being empathetic, being able to
Absolutely.
share those human emotion and human, characteristics with another person. That's how you make them feel comfortable to let you guys in as, you're trying to help me, instead of, I gotta be always defensive and look to, my flight or flight turns on right away.
We can quote old movies or TV shows, it's the old school mindset of, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. That's a quote from a TV show that you would never know. But, we've had to move past that because what you feel and the history and those experiences are valid. And we have to incorporate that into the totality of the circumstances of what we are investigating and what we are dealing with. And we also have to be open to that. And so we have to self-care. So just like we're asking you to self-care, we're recognizing that we can't just do as I say and not as I do, right? And we have to change that perspective as well, because I'm not good to you if I'm not healthy.
Yeah. Anything else you want to touch on?
I think we can wrap it up.
Thank you guys so much for coming on this. Anything else you guys want to add?
No, but what I do want to say is if things happen in the community or nationwide that you just can't process or understand, and rightfully so, that you invite us back, because we want to process and have those difficult conversations together so that we can learn, but also talk it through so that ideally we all come back or come out.
Conclusion, yes. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Grant. So, I have our No Feeling is Final posters. No Feeling is Final, really. And that's really just my go-to all the time is there is never something that you can't get through. And we need you here.
And we've created a series of public service announcements. If you ever look on breakthesilencetogether.org, that has a video and short social media pushes for that. We also want to know that if you go on Fargo Cast Public Health website, there's what we call a safety plan. So before you're in the crisis, you can process what my resources are and people that I can turn to, that helps normalize those conversations, and putting a plan in place before you're in that crisis so that you recognize there's an out and resources and services for you. So
Thank you guys for tuning into another installment Beyond the Game podcast. Every Wednesday, regularly at 12 a.m.
Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. And you can comment whatever you guys want us to talk about on the next podcast.
Yeah, and any guests that you guys want us to feature on the next podcast, it could even be you.